I was a kid, the attic always scared me more than the basement did. I don't really know why. Most people are more afraid of basements, but there was something about our attic that really got to me. If I had to guess, I'd say it was because our attic was slightly unconventional compared to what you're probably picturing. For starters, it was surprisingly spacious. Most attics are typically cramped and congested, which makes sense. But our attic was built in such a way that you didn't ever have to crouch when you were up there. You might think that would imply we used it more often, the same way anyone would use excess space. But no, I'm not really sure why. But my parents treated it like a glorified storage room. That was its sole purpose. Thinking about it now, they honestly avoided it as much as possible. The other thing about it was that it had so many nooks and crannies built into it. What I mean by that is the space was broken up by odd beams and small changes in elevation, almost like a makeshift maze. The beams were of uneven thickness, and there was no pattern to where they appeared. The result was that you couldn't stand in any one place out there and have a clear line of sight from one end to the other. And the uneven flooring was a nightmare. You could genuinely enjoy yourself up there if you weren't careful. My dad used to joke that one day one of us would slip on one of the joists, fall through the insulation, and puncture a hole in the ceiling. So, you can imagine why an attic like that would be scary to a little kid. The maze-like quality was what freaked me out the most. I really didn't like not being able to see the attic in its entirety, and every time I went up there, I felt like someone was hiding behind one of the beams. But anyway, what I'm about to tell you happened so long ago that I do have a ton of other memories from that period in my life, for whatever reason. However, this memory is so vivid that it feels like a thorn protruding into what was otherwise a fantastic childhood. It happened during the week, which I remember because I had school that day. I'm not sure exactly how old I was, but I was in middle school. I woke up one morning and noticed my feet were dirty. The bottoms were gray and grimy, and there was this fine layer of grit between my toes that I couldn't explain. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at them, trying to figure, eternity, too scared to move. It was like sleep paralysis times 100. I knew the layout of the attic, but only vaguely and only from memory. I also knew there were obstacles everywhere. The idea of trying to find my way back to the hatch in complete darkness was almost unthinkable, but I couldn't just stand there forever. So, I started moving slowly and painfully. I was so scared that I actually started crying, but silently. The tears were just flooding down my face, and I felt like if I made too much noise, something was going to get me. It was the most terrified I've ever been, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone out there. I don't know what was giving me that thought, but I could feel something else there with me. Something further in the dark. And as soon as I had that thought, I actually heard something. There was a soft thud from somewhere behind me. It honestly sounded like a footstep or someone shifting their weight on the floorboards. He kept moving, but I heard the sound twice more, and both times, it sounded like it was coming from a different spot. At that point, I was convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that there was something else up there with me. I don't know how long it took me to find the hatch, but I eventually did find it. I went straight to my parents' room and woke them up. I was full on bawling at that point. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I told them what had happened, how I'd had to find my way back in the dark. I told them about the sounds, too, and that there was someone in the attic. I expected my dad to spring out of bed and rush up there with a baseball bat, but he didn't. They didn't even really take me seriously. My mom just hugged me and told me it was okay, that sleepwalking could be scary, but it wasn't dangerous. My dad offered to put a lock on the attic hatch if it would make me feel better, and I said yes, obviously. But I knew what I heard. I insisted that they at least check the attic, and my dad finally agreed. As I was watching my dad climb up there was a part of me that genuinely thought he wasn't going to make it back. But not 2 minutes later, he was already climbing back down the ladder. He told me there was nothing up there and to go back to sleep. So that's what I did. But lying in bed after that experience was the worst night of my life. After that, the sleepwalking did stop. I'm not sure what I would have done if it had chain to turn on the light. I remember looking around and thinking I genuinely couldn't remember the last time I'd been up there. But then I realized there was a problem. I had absolutely no idea what my dad had actually told me to grab. I couldn't remember any of his instructions. And, like they might contain Christmas decorations. I moved stuff around for probably 20 minutes, and I ended up making a complete mess of the place. I did eventually find the Christmas stuff, which spared me the anxiety of having to go back downstairs empty. But the attic was completely disorganized at that point. I made like 4 or 5 trips up and down the ladder, hauling everything to the living room. Once I was done, I went back up for one last look to make sure I hadn't missed anything important. I knew I was going to have to reorganize everything up there, which I wasn't looking forward to. As I was looking around the attic, bracing myself for all the stuff I was going to have to move, I saw something up there that looked out of place. In one of the back corners, kind of tucked behind all the stuff I'd moved around, there was this box I hadn't seen before. It was black and didn't look like a flimsy cardboard box, but something sturdier, like a document box or one of those fireproof things. Despite the heavy-duty look, it somehow looked older than everything else up there. Being a curious kid and all, I obviously opened it. Inside were papers, dozens and dozens of them, like an alarming amount. Notebooks, loose pages, some hand-drawn maps, even a few pages of what looked like sheet music. And the one thing they all shared was that they were all completely covered in handwriting. The maps, the notebooks, even the sheet music. I started going through it, trying to figure out what I was looking at. The handwriting was difficult to decipher at first, but the more my eyes adjusted to the lettering, the more I was able to understand. None of the pages were dated, but they seemed to be stacked in chronological order. Older stuff on top and newer entries near the bottom. I was so intrigued by that box and those papers that I told myself I wouldn't go back downstairs until I had read each one. The earliest entries were boring. Weather stuff, household tasks, random thoughts about the day. It kind of resembled a disorganized diary, and I was very quickly able to gather that whoever was responsible for writing it all was someone who had previously lived in that house. As I kept reading, though, things got weirder. For starters, the handwriting got slightly more chaotic, which was the first indication. But that was nothing compared to the content of what I was reading. Whoever wrote writing for a second. But it only got worse. The final pages weren't even sentences anymore, just tally marks. Rows and rows and rows of them, counting something I couldn't identify. And then the entries just stopped. Either the person had stopped writing them, or that was as far back as the record went. By the time I got through everything, I was genuinely shaking. I wanted to put everything back where I had found it, go back downstairs, and purge the memory of ever reading it from my brain. But there was something I had to do first. My eyes went straight to the wall the writer had been so fixated on, and the moment I realized there were actually some marks in it, I started feeling sick. I examined the wall, and some of the indents and cracks seemed to line up almost exactly with what that guy had been saying. It was a type of freaky I had yet to experience. I can only describe it as the feeling of being watched, but from multiple different angles. I could picture that guy clawing at the attic wall in a fit of lunacy. It felt like he was in there with me. Suddenly, I didn't want to spend another second in that attic. I grabbed the black box and went straight to my dad. He was just as shocked as I was. He had absolutely no idea what any of it meant, and he had definitely never seen it before. He told me he was 100% sure it wasn't his father's handwriting, which meant whoever wrote those entries must have been a person who lived there even before my grandpa. The thing was, his parents were both gone, and he knew absolutely nothing about the people who had lived in the house before them. My dad went up to investigate, and to my surprise, he took me with him. I felt a lot safer having him with me, so I didn't argue. I stood off to the side while my dad inspected the wall more meticulously than I did, using some of the pages as a guide. After a few minutes, he froze up. Like he was thinking. I thought he had given up, but he turned to me and told me he was going to rip the wall down. I was actually kind of shocked by that, but I was in no position to oppose him. So, that's exactly what he did. He ripped that wall down with some tools from the garage. And what we saw was shocking. The writer had been right. There was a space back there. A lot of space. It was several feet deep, and it ran the whole length of the wall. But that wasn't even the worst part. The walls of the hidden space were covered in markings, black lines, symbols, shapes I didn't even recognize. They covered almost every surface. I don't really know how to describe it, but those marks were something else entirely. They didn't look like writing. The implication was even worse than that, though, because my dad and I soon realized that there was no alternative entrance to that hidden space. So, how could someone have ever gotten in there in the first place? My dad and I just stood there completely overwhelmed by what we were looking at. Eventually, once the initial shock wore off, we confirmed there was nothing else in the space. And there wasn't. The entire room was empty, with the exception of whatever was drawn all over the walls. Things didn't end there. The more we thought about the situation, the less it made sense. At one point, my dad pointed out that whoever wrote those notebooks, whoever had been so obsessed with documenting every little detail, did not seem like the type of person who would so neatly organize everything in a little box and tuck it away in a corner. Compulsive behavior doesn't end with tidy archival work. That thought hadn't occurred to me until that moment, but I had to admit he was right. But that could only mean that someone else had compiled the collection. My dad was 2 steps ahead of me. I watched as this unreadable look washed over his face. It looked like a mix of sadness and confusion. He was quiet for a little, then said it must have been his father, my grandfather. He must have found the writings at some point, gathered them together, and stored them in that box. There wasn't much to do after that. My dad admitted years later that his dad having withheld something like that from him, and why he would even do that in the first place was something that would eat at him forever. And I don't blame him. As for me, I don't really know what to make of any of it. It happened so long ago that I don't think it matters anymore. But if I think about it for long enough, I can still freak myself out. I don't think anyone can rationalize it. There's no reasonable explanation. I used to think that whoever had written those entries was the same person who had scratched up that hidden space, and that they were probably just insane. But there were things in those pages that someone could only know after the wall was put up. But with the wall being up, there was no other way into that space. It truly makes no sense. My dad wouldn't let me keep the box when we ultimately moved out of that house. For all I know, it's still up there in that attic. All I know is this is a mystery I'll take with me. Every evening, like clockwork, I'd step out into my backyard. The old screen door would groan in protest, a familiar sound that was part of the ritual. This was my time, just me, the fading light, and the slow burn of a cigarette. The house, a 2-story relic I'd inherited from a great aunt I barely knew, was my silent companion. It had its quirks: the creaking floors, the drafty windows, the way the pipes would shudder and moan. I'd grown used to it all, or so I thought. One particular Tuesday, the air was unusually still. The sky was a bruised purple, and the cicadas hadn't started their nightly chorus. As I lit up, my gaze drifted upwards, tracing the weathered siding to the peak of the roof, and that's when I saw it. The attic window, a small, grimy square I never paid much attention to, was different. It wasn't broken, not exactly. It was host dark, not the darkness of a dusty, forgotten space, but a solid, absolute blackness. Like a void had opened up in the side of my house. I took a long drag from my cigarette, my mind racing. Had it always been like that? No, I was sure it hadn't. I remembered seeing the afternoon sun glinting off that window just a few days ago. A shiver that had nothing to do with the evening chill ran down my spine. I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was a trick of the light, the strange twilight playing games with my eyes. I finished my smoke, stubbed it out in the old coffee can I used as an ashtray, and went back inside, determined to forget about it. But I couldn't. The image of that black square was seared into my brain. The rest of the evening felt off. Every creak of the house sounded louder, more intentional. The usual drafts felt like cold fingers tracing my skin. I tried watching TV, reading a book, anything to distract myself. But my eyes kept darting towards the ceiling, towards the general direction of the attic. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to see. The attic pull-down cord was in the hallway of the 2nd floor. It was coated in a thick layer of dust, and I had to yank it hard, sending a small cloud of grime into the air. The wooden stairs unfolded with a series of loud, protesting cracks. A wave of stale, musty air washed over me, the classic smell of old wood and forgotten memories. I grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand, took a deep breath, and started to climb. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It wasn't the musty odor I expected. It was sharp, chemical, and overwhelmingly strong. It smelled like fresh paint. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, and my breath caught in my throat. This wasn't my attic. The familiar jumble of dusty boxers, old furniture draped in white sheets, and holiday decorations was gone. Everything was gone. The space was a scene of utter devastation. The wooden floorboards were splintered and torn, some of them ripped clean from the joists, leaving gaping holes that looked down into the 2nd floor ceiling. The rafters above were shattered, hanging down in jagged splinters like broken teeth. It looked like a tornado had ripped through this one specific room, leaving the rest of the house untouched. It made no sense. There had been no storm, no earthquake, no explosion. I hadn't heard a thing. But the destruction wasn't the most disturbing part. The most disturbing part was the paint. Everything: the shattered floorboards, the broken rafters, the inside of the roof, the very walls themselves was covered in a thick, glistening coat of black paint. It was wet. My flashlight beam reflected off its slick surface, and I could see drips slowly making their way down the splintered wood. The air was thick with the fumes, so strong it made my eyes water. I took a hesitant step forward, my shoe making a soft squelching sound as it landed on a painted surface. Who would do this? And how? The sheer logistics were staggering. To destroy the attic so completely without making a sound, and then to paint the entire wreckage. It was impossible. I shone my light into a corner, and my heart hammered against my ribs. There were no footprints. Not mine, not anyone's. Just the undisturbed, wet, black paint. It was as if the paint had simply appeared. My hands started to tremble, the beam of the flashlight dancing erratically across the glistening chaos. I backed away slowly, my mind screaming at me to get out. As I moved, my light caught something on the far wall, the only section that wasn't completely shattered. For a second, I thought it was just a trick of the light, a pattern in the way the paint had dripped, but it wasn't. Scratched into the wet paint, as if with a fingernail or a sharp piece of wood, were letters. They weren't neat. They were jagged, frantic, almost unreadable. It took me a moment to decipher the single, terrifying word that had been carved into the wall of my destroyed attic. It said, "Hello." I didn't wait to see anything else. I practically fell down the attic stairs, not even bothering to fold them back up. I scrambled down to the first floor, grabbed my keys and my phone, and ran out the front door, not even stopping to close it. I didn't stop running until I was halfway down the block, standing under the sterile glow of a streetlight, gasping for breath. From that distance, the house looked normal, just an old, creaky house on a quiet street. But I knew what was inside. I knew about the silent destruction, the impossible paint, the single, chilling word. My smoking ritual, my little moment of peace, had led me to a truth I could never unsee. The house wasn't just old. It was hiding something. Something that had been waiting in the dark, and had now decided to say hello. I never went back into that house alone. I called the police, of course. They came. They looked. They were baffled. There was no sign of forced entry. No explanation for the state of the attic. They documented it as a bizarre case of vandalism, but even they didn't seem convinced. How could a vandal work in absolute silence and leave no trace? In the weeks that followed, I tried to rationalize it. A squatter with a vendetta. A very elaborate, very sick prank, but none of it fit. The silence, the lack of footprints, the sheer physical impossibility of it all. I eventually sold the house at a huge loss, disclosing the unexplained structural damage to the attic. I never told the new owners about the paint or the ward. Some things you just can't explain. I still think about it all the time. Sometimes, when the night is too quiet, I can almost smell the sharp scent of wet paint. I've moved to a new apartment now, a modern building with no attic and no creaky floors. I've even quit smoking. I don't need that ritual anymore. I've learned that some things are better left unseen, and that sometimes the quietest places have the loudest secrets. The memory of that black, wet, glistening void is enough to keep me from ever wanting to look too closely into the dark again. Thanks for watching. If you have any similar strange stories, I'd love to hear them in the comments. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling dailies. Stay safe out there. Me out so much that I genuinely almost fell off the ladder. I don't know why, but seeing that dripping pain terrified me to the point that I felt like I couldn't breathe. My brain immediately jumped to the worst possible conclusion. Some freak was in my house. I did one quick sweep of the attic with my flashlight to make sure there was no one in there, and that was it for me. I practically fell down the ladder in my rush to get back to the second floor. In a matter of seconds, my feared back. I was going to find this person, and I was going to defend myself. I started tearing through the house, checking every room, but I didn't find anything. And the more I looked, the more discouraged I got. The adrenaline was also starting to wear off, and I was becoming much more afraid again, which didn't help matters at all. I cleared the house and went back upstairs to my bedroom, thinking maybe I had missed something. But even after checking the whole room again, I didn't find anything. The moment I paused to take a breather, though, I heard something. 2 thumps, then what sounded like something heavy being dragged across the floor. The sounds were coming from directly above me, which could have only meant one thing. The attic. How stupid of me. Whoever was up there had probably never even left. They had probably been hiding behind one of the overturned storage boxers. I don't know where the courage came from, but something in me snapped. This was my parents' house, and whoever was up there violated it. Before I could talk myself out of it, I ran downstairs to the kitchen and grabbed the biggest knife I could find, and you best believe I was ready to use it. I went back upstairs and pulled the ladder down again. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the rungs, but I forced myself to keep climbing, and then I just started screaming like a full-on lunatic. I burst through the attic opening, yelling at the top of my lungs, waving the knife around like some kind of maniac. Part of it was anger, but honestly, most of it was fear. I stomped around the attic as aggressively as I could, flipping boxers and screaming the whole time, but there was no one up there. I was sure about it this time. My attic isn't that big. It's just one big space, so there's quite literally nowhere to hide. There was something up there, though, something new. Seeing it killed every ounce of bravery I had managed to scrape together. There were scratch marks everywhere, long deep gouges in the wooden beams and floorboards like an animal had been clawing at them. The pain from before was still there, but the scratches were layered over everything. And after seeing that, I was done. I ran back down to the first floor bathroom, locked myself in there, and called 911. The police arrived maybe 15 minutes later. 2 officers went up to check the attic while I was waiting downstairs with the 3rd one. When they finally came back down, all they could tell me was the attic was empty. They also told me they couldn't find any gaps anywhere up there. So, whoever had vandalized my property and terrified me must have left through the house. I insisted that their explanation was impossible. I would have heard them leave. Like I said before, the house is incredibly creaky. So, even the slightest step is enough to make a sound that I would have heard, even from a floor down. But there was nothing else the officers could do, and nothing else they could tell me. So, they left. It's been 3 weeks since that night, and luckily, there haven't been any further incidents. So, I guess I have no choice but to believe that some homeless person snuck into my attic, vandalized it for whatever reason, and left without me noticing. But the problem is, I don't believe that. I really don't know what to make of all this, but I refuse to believe that some homeless person caused all of it. It's something worse than that. I still haven't been back up there, even to clean the paint. I really don't know what to do.